Hi, welcome to another episode of Spirituality with a Twist, where we explore the mysteries of spirituality and the science and philosophy behind it. I'm your host, Mithilesh, and today we have a very special guest joining us who has dedicated his career to making complicated concepts and issues accessible to people of all ages and backgrounds. Arthur Yalevberg, an experienced teacher and author of the book A Theology for the Rest of Us. Arthur draws inspiration from both Eastern and Western religious traditions to explore how we can approach the divine without dogma or rigid beliefs. As a lifelong educator and spiritual seeker, he has first hand experience in delving into many different religious traditions, helping him understand the roots of theology and identify personal beliefs. In this episode, Arthur shares his knowledge and insights on approaching spirituality in a way that is accessible to everyone, from discussions on the role of theology in today's society to exploring the intersection between science and spirituality. Arthur offers a unique perspective that is sure to inspire and challenge your thinking. Are you ready to explore the mysteries of the universe and unlock the secrets of yourself? So join me on a journey of self discovery as we delve into the realms of spirituality with a unique perspective. Together, we will challenge the conventional thinking, push the boundaries of our understanding of the world around us. So sit back, relax, and let's embark on adventure because this is spirituality with a twist. So, Arthur, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, Arthur, first of all, our audience, our listeners are already aware of your work and all that you have done, your book also. So, take us way back to your childhood. What were you like then? How did you got inspired to do such work, and what inspired you to write such a book called Theology for the Rest of Us?
Yeah. Well, actually, as a kid, I really was kind of, I don't know that I would have qualified as a conscious sentient being. I was kind of oblivious. There was no religious, spiritual upbringing in the house. My mother was Mexican, and she was more superstitious than anything. I don't know if how familiar your listeners might be with some of these, but basically, if you had a dream about something, whatever it was, it had a numerical significance. So she would bet whatever the number was at dog racing. And my father was from Canada, was a devout atheist. I mean, if you couldn't see it and measure it, he wasn't interested. But at some point along the line, I saw the movie King of Kings with Jeffrey Hunter playing Christopher Pike. I don't know how many of you people are Star Trek fans, but Jeffrey Hunter was the first Christopher Pike and the pilot for Star Trek. Anyway, apparently it was the first movie since the 1930s where Jesus was actually portrayed. And I was enthralled. And then I saw there was this TV show called Kung Fu with David Carradine, who was this exiled Taoist monk from China who was living in the Wild West, and how he applied his Taoist teachings to everything that was going on in the Wild West. Again, I found very interesting. So in Hinduism, I know there's this saying that which you are seeking is causing you to seek. Yeah, I mean, this stuff came to me out of the blue, and I became very, very interested, relatively young age, and all ever since. When I started my professional career in teaching, these ideas kept percolating in my mind. The one thing that kept coming up, and this was one of the one of the advantages of being oblivious as a kid, I didn't know better than if I had a question, I would just ask it. And for people to disapprove or to think it was funny or dumb or whatever, it never entered my mind. I just, whatever came to mind, I just asked. And what I found, especially as a teacher in middle school, kids are much more conscious of their friends and what people are going to think. And I'm amazed at how many times I get responses to the effect of thank you, agree with you, disagree with you, but you've kind of opened the door, given people permission to talk about stuff or ask questions that before they kind of felt intimidated. So, okay, I mean, that was always my approach in teaching. A lot of teachers see kids as, empty vessels that they have to fill with
Yeah.
information. And my attitude was always, no, it was never in the United States. It was never who was Abraham Lincoln. It was more, do you think Abraham Lincoln was a good president? Or do you think George Washington would have thought Abraham Lincoln was a good president? In other words, the kids have to have information, but the approach is conceptual. It's about values and ideas. And yeah, that works with kids of all ages, including adults.
How did you got inspiration to write the book? Because you were doing such education work, so it was kind of unrelated to write a book. So how did you got, and why did you even write the book?
Well, so I'm an only child, so narcissism comes very naturally to me. But I'm not prepared to say that this whole global pandemic and COVID-19 and all this stuff was designed by the divine to get me to sit down and write this book. But the fact of the matter is, I had just retired, and the divine being what it is, I had the opportunity to live in Singapore for the last 2 years of my career in a day school and in international school in Singapore. Came back, and there's this pandemic. Well, I play a lot of chess, and I like watching television and whatever, but these ideas were percolating. I said, you know what? As you can tell, I am no longer as young as I ever was. So I just kind of sat down and wrote. I always liked to write. And in schools, you're always proofreading and writing and things like that. And what I found was that this opportunity with the pandemic, yeah, I just sat down and thought, I write the book. A lot of the things, I indicate this a little bit in the book too. I always try to think, without being morbid, I always like to think in terms of my deathbed. And I'm on my, anytime I have a choice to make or whatever, I think in terms of, well, I'm on my deathbed and I'm looking back on this moment. Am I going to be happy that I did this or didn't do that? And I got to tell you, I'm on my deathbed and I'm looking back and I have the thought that I could have written this book. Yeah, I'm going to be real disappointed if I don't write the book. If it works, great. If people find it helpful, great. And if they don't, that's fine too. But I wrote the book. I did what I wanted to do. Whatever happens, happens.
So you just wrote it when you had this knowledge and you wanted to just put it inside the book that you have gathered. You don't want to just leave the world on your deathbed without leaving that knowledge that you have gathered in your lifetime too in the book. But who do you think
I'm much more of an only child. It's not about benefiting the world. It's about doing what I wanted to do. So it's much more self-centered.
So who do you think is the target audience for this book? Like, who is this book for exactly?
Well, to be perfectly honest, it's easy for me to answer. I can say something like, anybody who has these kinds of spiritual questions, but doesn't really know how to frame them, or anybody who wants permission to ask these questions or explore these things, or if anybody wants to take a risk in terms of, they're in a community and how's the community going to react? Okay, fine. But I got to tell you, I hope it doesn't sound like, I'm patronizing or anything like that. Yeah, I don't think in terms of readers. I really think that Brahman, the Tao, the Holy Spirit, whatever. Well, I wrote the book. Now it's out there, and opportunities like this come up to talk to you and to your listeners, and people read the book.
So basically, you think any spiritual person can pick up this book, in your opinion, who thinks like they're seeking
absolutely.
Something.
One of the nicest compliments I've gotten about the book is that I take very complicated topics and concepts and make them accessible. So I think it's very understandable. Again, agree, disagree, that's fine.
So that's one thing that is always that I wanted to ask you, that you have a great education background. So how does your education background influence the way you approach theological concepts? Because you have such a good education, so you're not just anybody going because you have that base for you. So how do you approach the concepts?
Yeah, I got to tell you, it's not so much about the educational background, but it's more about the approach. I'm not kidding when I say it's, I'm a teacher, but I'm a teacher in the sense that I have to make things understandable for students. And the first way I can do that is by making sure I understand them myself.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who talk about teaching, but they're really out to use a lot of fancy words and jargon and big vocabulary and all these kinds of things. And they're not really trying to communicate. Yeah, I'm trying to communicate. So I'm always thinking in terms of making things understandable. And that's how I approach things. So I try to put myself in the position of someone trying to understand. And that's how, I go about writing. So it's not about education. I really believe, I'm just Arthur. I'm really not, I don't have a lot of degrees. I don't have a fancy accent. A lot of these people who come out on television and books and whatever, they have this aura of elitism and stuff. I'm really not. I'm really just like everybody else. But I have tried to broach questions that sometimes I feel like other people have been intimidated or kind of repressed the idea of looking for answers. So the book is short. I mean, the book is barely 100 pages. So the idea is not to be complicated or erudite or super intelligent or anything like that. It's accessible and it's understandable because I really believe that language is about communication. It's not about impressing people or anything like that.
So can you explain about the title of the book, A Theology for Rest of Us? What does it
But
mean to you actually? And what
okay,
does it
well, first off, just to give you an idea, when I first, a publisher, I sent it out, and the publisher responded to it, and they thought the book title was going to be Theology for the Rest of Us, and I said no, it's A Theology. In other words, it's not. Most people who write these kinds of books have an agenda. They have something they want. I know stuff you don't, and I'm going to get you to believe my way of thinking. And that's not the approach at all. The approach is A Theology. These are the different issues that I have come across. These are some of the answers I have explored. But I have no illusions that I'm right. These are things that make sense to me. The Buddha said, be ye lamps unto yourself. Yeah, I'm a lamp, and not a particularly bright one, but I'm all I got. So I've tried to communicate in a way that it's one of the rest of us. So I don't look at it as me knowing everything and telling everybody else who's ignorant what they should believe. But I see us all on this common path. I've come to learn certain things. You've come to learn certain things. One of the nicest things about the book is people writing me and talking to me and asking and sharing what their experience has been like. And that's great. I don't have all the answers, and anything I can learn, the better.
So, when I was reading about the book before we conducted the podcast, I was reading that, and as you mentioned, it's having just 100 pages. So it's pretty short. Like people have these huge 300, 400 pages of book. And what I was reading, it says the book explores the theme to how to approach the divine without the dogma. That's the theme, or that's her. So can you elaborate on that idea a bit? That what does it exactly mean, and why is it important? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think again, when I say I'm Arthur, I think that's an important label because most people identify themselves. I'm a Hindu, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Taoist, I'm a Jew, I'm a Catholic, I'm a whatever. In other words, people identify themselves with groups. Yeah, I think real spirituality as opposed to religion, and I'm not one of these people who's down on religion. I think religion is great, and that's how communities try to approach the divine. But when you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're dealing with issues, the fancy word is existential angst. But when you're, wondering about meaning and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and you're really concerned about it, You're not part of a group. You're on your own. Soren Kierkegaard, this existentialist, talks about staring into the abyss. That when people reach this point where they begin to confront questions of their own mortality, yeah, you're on your own. When you're on your deathbed, you're on your own. So I think this notion of not having a dogma, it's very comforting to belong to a group, Hindu, Catholic, Muslim, whatever it is, because then you can say, well, it's not just me. All of us believe this. And there is security in numbers. But that, I don't think all the mystics, the real mystical types who really teach things that people have followed for years and years and years, they were on their own. I mean, they didn't start out as being part of a group. The Buddha, leaves the palace and he goes off on his own.
Yeah.
That's where
He has
Jesus
nobody.
is.
Yeah.
All of these people, though, started out on their own as individuals. And then when they got their insights, then they turn around and start teaching others. Well, it's at some point, we all have to do that. We have to confront things as ourselves.
So you mean without the dogma, we can understand the divine better? You feel that it's in today's modern world, if we don't have a dogma attached to us, we can understand the divine, the concepts better, in your opinion?
I don't think better is the word. I think more authentically. In other words, when you believe in a dogma, you're following somebody else. But it's just like in school. There are some teachers who want you to memorize facts. You know what? I tell you these facts and you give them back to me on a test and I'm happy and you're happy. It's a whole different educational experience when a teacher puts you in the position of making decisions for yourself. And then you have to make a commitment. You can't hide in the group. So I don't know that I've come up with better answers than anybody else, but I've come up with my answers. And I encourage people to come up with their answers, because when they're on their deathbed, it's going to be them. It's not going to be somebody else or somebody else's ideas that they're going to be parroting. There's a wonderful story in the Talmud about Zusia. He's on his deathbed. And he's a very simple man and, hasn't done a whole lot by anybody's standards. And he's all worried. So his friends come to him and they say, Zusia, why are you so worried? You've been a good guy. You've supported your family. You've worked hard. You've been honest. What are you so worried about? And he says, well, you know what? I've been nothing special. I'm pretty mediocre. I'm afraid that I'm going to die and go to heaven and God's going to be mad at me because I wasn't like Moses. And his friend tells him, he says, look, God already made Moses. He doesn't need another Moses. He made you to be Zusia. So if you're going to be worried, make sure you can tell God you weren't Moses, but you were Zusia, because that's how you were created. So I think the message of that story is to all of us.
To be ourselves.
Right, because God doesn't need another Jesus or another Krishna or another Arthur. He needs Arthur. He needs you. He needs individuals, because he's already got the other one. Oscar Wilde has this great line, be yourself, everybody else is taken. I think it's true.
So your book covers both Eastern and Western religious
It draws on both,
traditions.
yes.
So do you see any similarities or difference between the two when it comes to understanding the divine?
Yeah, I think that there are similarities, and there are things that are consistent. For example, especially with your listeners, I can't believe, it's impossible for me to believe in a good God or a good divinity, a moral divinity or moral order without reincarnation. It just doesn't make sense to me that, some 5-year-old and a 15-year-old and a 50-year-old in all different places in the world and all different times in history, that's it. Whatever they did in that 5 years or 15 years or whatever is it for all of eternity. So reincarnation has to work, because it's not that one and done. Well, guess what? There's reincarnation in the East. I know you know this in Hinduism, but it's also in the Jewish mysticism of the Kabbalah. It's called Gilgul Nefashot. You also have it in a variety of mystical circles, and not just in Hinduism. The questions about free will, questions about the nature of meditation. These are things that are found in different forms depending on culture, but in essence, it's the same idea. When people talk about Taoism, when Hindus talk about Brahman, when Christians talk about Christ consciousness, not the historical personality Jesus, but the universal Christ, they're saying exactly the same thing Hindus are talking about with Brahman. They're just using a different name, a different label because of their culture and language and that kind of stuff. So there are lots of similarities across the board.
So I I had this one thing in my mind that I was not in the question that I was thinking, but I wanted to ask you that if you're aware of this, because I want to light my audience also on this. Are you aware of the a specific doctrine in the Christianity community called Christian universalism? Are you aware of that?
Of course, yes.
So
It's
I
called
think
Christ consciousness.
so
Yes,
so 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 you, as you know, it's a lot of people are not aware of that thing. A lot of
right.
people are not aware of that small community in Christianity. So please elaborate what is that community and their or beliefs that and how it develops so people can know that such kind of community exists in Christianity, because it's amazing to know about it.
Okay, well, first off, it's not universally accepted, but I will explain. There's this writer, Richard Rohr, who's a Catholic priest. And the fact that he's a Catholic priest, I think, is very significant because I think a lot of people would have expected him to be excommunicated and defrocked. But basically, the approach of this universal consciousness is this. Most people hear the term Jesus Christ and they assume it's like Christ is his last name, but it's not. So there's a historical personality, Jesus, who lived, at a couple thousand years ago in a particular place to a particular people. He was a particular manifestation. Well, that's Jesus, and you can say everything about Jesus that you could say about the Buddha or Moses or Lao Tzu or anybody. He's a human being in a particular context, in a particular time, in a particular place. Christ is a term for this universal consciousness, awareness, this universal mystery that Jesus, Muhammad, all of these different personalities tap into. In other words, you have this divinity or this mystery that can manifest itself in different places, in different time periods, or whatever. So this takes place in Christianity too. The big problem in Christianity is the verse when Jesus says, "None may approach the Father except through me." So that for many Christians, probably most Christians, means, hey, you want to go to heaven? Got to be a Christian. None may approach the Father except through me. But Richard Rohr and people like Thomas Keating and people like them will say,
Who are a Catholic priest,
who
first
are
of all.
Catholic,
Yes,
not only
yes, yes.
Catholic, but Pope Francis. And I don't know that other popes would have done this, but Pope Francis not only did not excommunicate Richard Rohr, he took him on a tour of the Vatican. And it's not because he wanted to show him the paintings. He wanted to make a statement to the Catholic community that this is okay. So people like Richard Rohr and people like that will say, none may approach the Father except through me, as meaning not Jesus, but Christ, this universal mystery that everybody can tap into. So from that perspective, the me being Christ and not Jesus is much more universal. And you don't have to be Christian to go to heaven. You don't have to be anything. You just have to tap into this universal mystery.
And do
So
the right things to just as.
Yeah, but that's easy. I mean, it's not just about morality. Morality is nice. Don't get me wrong, but it's not about spirituality. People who are spiritual are nice, not because they're moral, but because they understand that they're one with the universe and everybody else. People who steal, right? People who steal. Why do you steal? You steal because you want something that somebody else has. But if you understand that you and the other person, this somebody else, are part of the same entity. They're part of the same substance. You're not gaining anything because you're already together. It's like picking your own pocket. You don't reach in your pocket for your wallet and pick it up and steal it and put it in your right-hand pocket.
So, so I was when I was reading about the Christian universalism, so I was reading that they also say that a loving God cannot make eternal hell. That hell could exist or not, that's also a debate in the community in there. But they say even if it exists, it cannot be eternal because all loving God can never put somebody in eternal hell. Either there will be like a temporary phase, they will be staying there and then attain heaven. But they are not somebody else. They are just in that same community. People think that the universal concept is absurd, but they are the same Catholic priest. They are not somebody else. They don't want to but they're just saying the concept that they have developed is so similar to Buddhism and Hinduism that have this consciousness. But people, because I would not say this to displease anyone because everyone has their own faith, but people usually think God to be some human sitting up in the clouds,
Right.
which is absurd, to be honest, because they think that he has a big scroll, he's looking at everybody's biodata. It's just absurd. You have to, when you think logically, it is not possible. So that's why it's a big concept. But again, whatever you believe is your belief. I'm just keeping my point here, just as you kept. So if somebody doesn't agree, that's up to them. But the concept that they develop is pretty great, I think. And they are not against Christianity as well. As I said, they are in the doctrine, but it's a really controversial one. So
I wouldn't take it so literally, though. The people like Richard Rohr and that.
Yeah.
Remember, Jesus also said the kingdom of heaven is within you.
Yeah.
So it's as opposed to saying God is, this in the Sistine Chapel up, a man throws lightning bolts and stuff like that. God does not create hell. Right. The notion that God somehow wants anybody. I mean, the whole idea of eternity makes no sense to me. It's boring.
Yeah.
But Jesus also says that the kingdom of heaven is within you. So God may not create a hell, but I can create a hell. In other words, if I feel guilty about something, or I, am miserable, or I'm depressed, or whatever it is, I can create my own hell that's independent of God. And that is real.
I tell you a really small story to our listeners too. So what happened once upon a time, a person died. Okay. He was put in the court of God. God was there. And he accomplished everything in his life. A successful human do. Wealth, woman, everything that a man can dream of. But obviously God was upset. When he came there, God asked him, you did everything in your life, but for that wealth, you murdered people, you killed people for your own gain. That man said, yes, I did. Then he said, you raped girls for, sexuality and everything. You did these kind of things. And he said, yes, I did. Of course I did. So God said, if you keep saying yes and yes, after everything I say, I'm going to send you to hell. This God said. So this man said, you cannot send me to hell. God said, why can I not send you to hell? So he replies that because I was already living in hell. How will you send me to hell now? So after hearing this, God started sweating because he said he cannot send him because he's already living in hell. He already seen the hell. Now what the hell he will send to him? Because so now he says, God kind of, says I'm going to send you to heaven now. Then I'm going to send you to heaven. Then you cannot do that too. Then he said, who do you think you are? God said, who's above me? Who is above me that I cannot send you to heaven? So he said, I have not dreamed even this much of any luxury or any beautiness or any kind of a thing. So even if you send me to heaven, I'm going to make it a hell. I'm going to make it hell. Because even if you send me to heaven, I'm going to make it and live I'm in hell. And they say that case is still pending right there. So see, this is not the case of any other human being. It's the case of everybody. Wherever we want to go, we go. It's not nobody going to put us anywhere. We cannot be put to anywhere. We go wherever we want to go. So this story is pretty important. And as I said, any religion, the purpose of any religion is to make you a better person, to make you stand out to make you another Jesus. If I have to be pretty honest, you have to be another Jesus. So you have to spread the world. You can be a nice person. That's what Jesus teaches love. That's what Jesus did in the world. So back to the interview, because we got into that topic.
Sure.
In your opinion, what are some of the most pressing questions facing theologians today they are facing, in your opinion?
Well, I think you put your finger on a big one in terms of this notion of heaven and hell. Stephen Hawking is this, he passed away relatively recently. If anybody had any reason to be miserable, it was Stephen Hawking. He he had some kind of disease. He was all handicapped. He had to talk through a voice box, etc.
Yeah.
And yet he was always optimistic. He had a sense of humor. He continued his brilliant work in physics, etc., etc. If anybody had a right to be miserable, it was him. And yet you have all these people who are healthy, wealthy, powerful, have everything they could imagine, and yet they're miserable. They always want more. They need something else. They need to be number one. There was this Ted Turner. I don't know if people know. Ted Turner was the starter of Turner Classic Music, Turner Classic Movies, and owns the Atlanta Braves and a bunch of stuff like that. He was interviewed on television, and he was, at the time, he's not anymore. At the time, he was the fourth richest man in the world, and he's unhappy. Fourth richest man in the world, he's unhappy.
Why is he unhappy?
Why is he unhappy? Because I'm not number one. I didn't get to be number 4 by being happy at being number 4. You want to be number 1. So in terms of your question, I think the most important question facing theologians today, besides the philosophical stuff about free will and all that, which is significant and challenging, but it's not the most important. The most important thing is to develop in people a sense of perspective where they understand in themselves that the things they are trying, the need that they are trying to satisfy, you're not going to satisfy externally. It doesn't matter how much money you have. And, a lot of people say that, but it's true. People who are rich are also unhappy. Now, the Buddha was right. You also can't be terribly poor. When he was fasting, the only thing he realized that extreme fasting caused him was that he was hungry, and he was always thinking about food. So it's got to be a middle way. But, Jesus said man does not live by bread alone, but he doesn't live without bread either. You have to have some bread. Having said that, Jews have this thing, ein kemach, ein Torah. If you don't have wheat and bread, you don't have biblical study. So I think what theologians need to do is to help people realize that there's a perspective that can allow us, no matter what it is that's happening, to have a perspective that we're not going to die. It was just Easter. Yesterday was Easter Sunday, and I think the power of the message of Jesus is that he died. The passion of Jesus on Good Friday. He's tortured, he's humiliated, he dies a terrible, gruesome death. And yet he comes back. Now, I'm not going to get into a whole historical thing. Did it happen? Did it not happen? All that kind of thing. The real message, though, is wherever we find ourselves, in whatever situation we find ourselves, if we can look at that situation from the divine perspective, we can realize it's okay. It's going to be okay, because the universe is rational, the universe is good, and at the end of the day, we're going to understand what we don't understand in this particular situation. If theologians can instruct that, that'd be great.
So can you tell us about a time when your own personal beliefs were challenged or evolved that you were having? Was there such a time in such a long life?
I gotta tell you, and well, first off, as anybody, as anybody, anytime things don't go my way, it's not just things aren't going my way. There is no God. The universe is terrible. I mean, you could go into this self-pity pit where you never come out of it. But I have a lot of trouble with people who look at there are mystics, And, they go around talking about the world as an illusion. And, don't worry about it because it's all an illusion and it's all a dream and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I can't do that because when I see suffering, and it doesn't have to be people, it could, cats, there's all kinds of animal cruelty and stuff like that. There are all kinds of terrible things that happen where people suffer real pain. And it doesn't do a whole lot of good to tell them, well, it's okay because it's just an illusion. Anytime I see that kind of broad suffering, I have a lot of trouble. And the only way I come out of it is with the sense, not that the world is an illusion, but that the world is temporary. The Buddha's talk about impermanence is very powerful for me because it tells me everything is a stage of development. And what is very painful, I can look back. It's funny. I can remember I was like 4 years old or something like that. And I was running in the driveway and I fell. And I was skinned my knee and I was in terrible pain. It was bleeding and et cetera, et cetera. And I thought that was the end of the world. Well, guess what? It wasn't the end of the world. It hurt for a while and this and that, but eventually it healed. The crush of my life, and when I was 17 years old, 18 years old in high school, dumped me. Well, I was miserable. I couldn't take it. I was upset. I was sad, whatever. And I'm never getting out of this. Well, guess what? I got out of it. I met other people. I wound up getting married. I had kids, etc. So I guess and I can't tell you as a middle school teacher, one of the big issues with middle school and adolescents is they think whatever is happening right now is going to go on forever. My best friend hates me. Well, you know what? You might feel differently tomorrow. No, there is no tomorrow. Well, okay, well, we'll see. If we wake up tomorrow and there's no tomorrow, give me a call. We'll talk about it. So I guess what I'm saying is anytime there's a vision of suffering, it's very, very hard to rationalize and reconcile that suffering with the notion of universal goodness. And it only works. The technical term is theodicy. It only works in the context of reincarnation, where everything is a phase and a stage. But it's not always easy. You have to be able to say that things like, I don't know, pedophilia, Holocaust, racism.
So it's just being in the moment and just working through it, that this is not going to be permanent. If until my breath is there, I can fight this. That's what I think we should do. But how do you think that spirituality can help individuals navigate difficult times and challenges? Because we are on to this point, as you said. So how do you think that spirituality can help individuals navigate and difficult times and challenges?
Well, because I think it's all about equanimity and dispassion. The Dalai Lama, among others, says anxiety and fear and anger and all these things never help anything. If there's a problem, some serious problem, if there's a solution, okay, solve it. If there's no solution, okay, and then accept it. There's nothing that's gained by being angry or going into despair or anything like that. In other words, what we want to look for and what spirituality can help us with is not with what's happening out there, but what's happening in here and in our hearts. In other words, we can approach situations, focus on the situation and try to do what can be done, but it doesn't affect us inside. I think that's the message of spirituality, because people who are always anxious, people who are in despair, people who are so involved emotionally in what is happening, ultimately, if you analyze it, it's because they're afraid of death. I mean, this is the basic existential question. They're worried that they're going to lose something significant. Well, if you believe in spirituality and the divine realm and all those kinds of things, you're not going to die. In other words, your physical body may disappear, but whatever makes you uniquely you, that is going to continue. And
So
if I'm wrong, just to finish, and if I'm wrong, so screw it. It doesn't really matter. Shakespeare has this line, to be or not to be. No, it doesn't really matter. If there is a God and there is a divine realm, everything's going to be great. And if I just disappear, you know what? That's fine too. I won't be around to think about it.
so I was reading with the Bible, even if you see the way they mention about after the last judgment, they mention there's going to be like a merger with Christ, in an intimate way, as it's written there, it's going to be a merger. And then, but
Revelations.
but in some verses they say you will still have retain some physical identity or this. So that's why some people have thought this to be just the Abrahamic way of heaven. But usually, if you read the Bible of the older editions, which were written during that time, maybe some consider it the true translation.
You
They
don't mean
the
the
way
Bible, you mean the Gospels.
Yes, sorry. So the gospel. So in the way it's structured mentioned, it says that you're going to get merged to Christ. So it's just similar to what Hinduism and Buddhists are saying for millions of years, that about the Brahman, the merger. So in an intimate way. So with this, also as we are on the Bible, I'm going to ask you two things. First of all, you mentioned that the book provides insights into culture and history. When I was reading about it, it also has this history and culture. Why is it important to understanding the theology? And also, you remember when we did a call before we recorded this podcast, you mentioned about how they named Yahovah from the
Yes.
translation. So also tell our listeners about that also.
Okay, well, the second one is easier. The whole idea of God's name, when God comes to Moses and wants to send him on his mission to have the Jews released from slavery in Egypt, Moses asks him his name. Who's going to send me? So God says, "I am who I am." Yeah, sure, yeah. Or another translate, "I will be who I will be." In other words, I don't have a name. I am who I am, and you can understand me not in my essence, but you can understand me in my behavior through history. Well, if you take the Hebrew letters, the Yud Hey Vav Hey, and transliterate them it becomes JVH, and that's how it becomes Jehovah. So God, when talking to Moses, when Moses asks him his name, God says, "I don't have a name. I am simply being. I am pure being." But people
I am
being
just
people,
who I am. Yeah.
I am
I'm
who I am. And people being people, though, they need labels. So they took that no name and turned it into a name. So I don't know how many people know that, but that's where this business of Jehovah came from. Uh, Now, what was the first question again?
So the first question is that you mentioned that the book provides insights into the culture and the history. So why is it important in understanding theology?
Because I don't think I don't think you can separate people's identities from their context, from where they grew up and this kind of stuff. So, for example, there's a nice book, I forget the author, but it's a history of God. It's a very pretentious title. And it's like 500 pages. So, it's a long, long book. I don't know if I'm going to make my way through it. But one of the things they talk about is that the nature of a lot of religious beliefs are based on the context. So, for example, the Bible, right, it is based on a lot of what happened in Mesopotamia. Well, Mesopotamia is a tough place. It's at the Middle East, and it's called the Middle East because it was always being conquered. People from the West, people from the East,
Yeah.
people from the South. So it was very tumultuous. Well, lo and behold, what do you have? What do you have? You have this God who's a God of war, the Lord of hosts, who fights in battles and has armies, because that's what's going on around them all the time. Yeah, Hinduism is different. It's not, Brahman is not a lord of hosts who fights. Krishna, it does not take on an army. He's a charioteer in the Gita. He's not an active participant in battle and things like that. Different culture, different society. A lot of these things are more localized in that regard. But it's so funny. People in so many different cultures and different contexts come to essentially a lot of the same ideas. So if you look at when in China, when the Taoists talk about the Tao, or when Hindus talk about Brahman, or Christians talk about Christ consciousness, there's an understanding that there's this mystery out there that you don't fully understand, but you can be reassured that it's there. In Hinduism, I know there's a very simple line. People talk about, fourth grade. I remember this fourth grader asked me this question. Okay, what? Well, tell me about heaven, Mr. Yalevberg. I said, what do you mean? What do you want to know? So she goes like this. She goes, well, imagine a couple is married. Okay. And they love each other. But the wife dies. Okay. She's a good person. She goes to heaven. Okay. The husband remarries. Okay. They love each other, etc. Finally, they all die. Who's the guy married to in heaven? So I said, yeah, I don't know. So I think she was very astute. And she said, and she asked the question, well, suppose somebody I really have a crush on somebody. I really love this person, but this person hates me. We're both good people, but I love him and he doesn't like me at all. And we die. Well, for me to go to heaven without him, it's not heaven. And for him, if I'm there, it's hell. So how does this work? So basically, it's a cute story, but basically it points to the problem of taking a lot of these stories too literally. So conceptually, I got to tell you, I don't want to look like this for all of eternity, whether it's heaven or whatever. When I wake up in the morning and I'm getting out of bed, I don't want to feel that way for all of eternity. But I also don't want to stop knowing who I am and what my consciousness is. So when you use a phrase like, you're going to maintain your identity, and even when you're in heaven, I don't know what that means, because if it means looking like this, I'm not happy. But if it means remembering I'm Arthur, then I am happy. So the Hindus have this very simple line, not two. It's not two. They're not going to go so far as to say one, because when you say one and merging with heaven or merging with Jesus or merging with Brahman or whatever it is, when you say merge, it's like you dissolve, you disappear into this thing. So you don't dissolve, but you're not two in the sense that you're completely separate either. You somehow are both. Now, one of the nice things about mysticism, and, I know your audience, but one of the nice things about mysticism is some of this stuff is very sexual. So, and when you talk about love and physical love and things like that, the tantric Buddhists talk about this imagery. Some of it is sexuality, where the two become one and yet are two. They're two individuals, but they become one. And it's linguistically, it's a problem. How can you be both two and one? Well, that's what the relationship, a true relationship, is all about.
Of
You
love
merge together.
in love we become one. Even though we are two, it becomes one. That's
and
the same
that's
way
the kind of mystery, the paradox that linguistically is a problem. But anybody who's been in love knows it works. You can be two and one at the same
Yes,
time.
correct. So I was on the question that today, as you were we talking just a few minutes before about the books. So there are a lot of books today in spirituality and religion, some pretty long and some pretty detailed, etc. The good books also. So how do you think your books fit into the current landscape of books on religion and spirituality? How is it different, and what it is like? Why should people read it apart from the other books that exist in the market?
Yeah, well, one thing, it's short. It's a lot shorter. But I think that the main thing, and I mentioned this before, I don't have an agenda. Just about every other book I've read, it almost doesn't matter, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever it is, they're basically preaching some line. This is what I believe. You should believe it too. And, that's in the whole book is about why their thing is good. The other kinds of books are about broad history book. Houston, anybody who wants a broad understanding of a variety of religious traditions, Houston Smith has a great book called The World's Religions. And he's very sympathetic. When he talks about Islam, you could swear he's a Muslim. When he talks about Judaism,
Which
you'd swear he was Jewish. He's very
I couldn't catch the name. Which name you said?
His name is Houston,
Okay, okay,
Huston
okay.
Smith. The World's Religions, great book, but he doesn't take a stand. So what do you have? You have a whole bunch of books where people are taking a stand. Believe me, I came up with these ideas. You should believe them too. Or you have this other bunch of books that talk about religions, but they don't take a stand. What I do, I think, is different in the sense of I talk about a lot of different religions, but I take a stand. But this is my stand. And I encourage people, this is what I've come to. If you come across the same information, what will you come to? I don't know that a lot of books do that. Most books, they're either preaching something or they're just summarizing things objectively. They don't take this middle road that says, yeah, we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but I'm going to challenge you to come up with your own answers.
So it's been a while since the book has been out. I'm hoping that you've gotten some feedback also. So can you share an example that how this book has impacted any reader? Like, can you share us with some feedback?
Yeah, it's interesting. I teach adult education classes. People ask me to talk and different things, especially as a former teacher. So talking about, one example. So this guy comes up to me. I've been talking about Catholicism. Easter was coming up and all that. So he goes, well, I haven't been to church in 20 years. I can't stand the notion of the Trinity. The Trinity is God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. How they can be three in one, it makes no sense to me. So I looked at him and I said, well, I don't, I'm not a Catholic. Like I said, I'm just Arthur, but the Trinity doesn't bother me a whole lot. You have this substance, and when you freeze it, it becomes ice. And if you boil it, it becomes a vapor. And if you just leave it at room temperature, it's a liquid. It's the same stuff, but depending on the context, you freeze it, you boil it, or you leave it alone, it takes different forms. So scientists will say it's H2O. Well, that to me is what the Trinity is. You have this divine stuff, this substance, but it takes different forms in different places. Hindus have basically the same thing. They have a bunch of gods and goddesses and demons and all this kind of stuff. But everybody understands that there's really Brahman taking the form of all these different things.
Yeah, they know about it. That this is
exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm standing here, teaching this class. I'm Arthur. I'm a teacher, but I have a father, so I'm a son. I have kids. I even have grandkids. I'm also a grandfather and this and that. I'm a chess player. I have all kinds of identities depending on the context. So the Trinity basically is no big deal. It's just meaning that the divine substance takes these different forms. So he listens to me. He shakes his head and he walks away. The next week he comes back to class and he goes, I got to tell you, Mr. Yalevberg, I went to church for the first time in 20 years because I could now understand what the Trinity was. It wasn't even that I understood the Trinity, but it was more that it was okay to question, and you didn't tell me I was a bad person because I couldn't believe what I'm supposed to believe. I said, that's what spirituality is all about. You have to deal with these questions on your own. So there's a practical example.
So as a lot of people who are listening to the podcast from the States or somewhere on the UK side, Catholics or Christian, even Jewish, the term Brahman that you keep referring to in the podcast and even the consciousness, they might be still confused what this exactly means. You know what I'm trying to say. So they are still not that much aware into this concept. So please explain to us the what is the concept of Brahman and what do you mean by the Christ consciousness to someone who is not absolutely aware. He thinks God is somebody in the years, So please explain to us about that.
Well, I would if I could, but Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says Anybody who says he knows what the Tao is doesn't know, and people who know don't talk about it. But again, in that case where in the biblical story where God comes to Moses and Moses asks him who he is, God says, you can't know who I am. I am who I am, period. But what you can know is what I do in history. So I can't explain what Brahman is or Christ consciousness is or the Tao or anything like that, because in its essence, it's a divine mystery. But when I can ask the question, and this is what I start out in the book, you have to look around your world and say, does it make sense that this is random? Does it make sense? You can't throw up a bunch of metal up in the air, even if it's got all the right parts in it, and have it come down as a car. You just can't. There's an order in the universe that says there's a rationality here where nothing in science explains how rationality comes from irrationality. If there's rationality, and there has to be a source for rationality. I would say the same about love and compassion. For people to be able to experience love and compassion, there has to be a source for that love and compassion out there. So I can't define or draw a picture of the source, but I can presume that there is a source from what I experience. There's love, there's compassion, there's rationality. There has to be a source for that. In the Bible, there's the book of Job, and it's a wonderful story in a lot of ways, and it's a terrible story in a lot of ways. But at the end of the story, Job is upset and he's disappointed and he's depressed and this and that. And God appears to Job out of the whirlwind and says to him, where were you when I created the universe? And Job feels better. The logical question is, why does he feel better? He didn't get any answers. The answer he got was that an affirmation that there is this source, this divine that exists. So I look at the world. I can't explain the source. I can't define it, but I can't understand the world in terms of love and compassion without assuming there is a source. As long as I can believe there's a source, I feel good.
So I was like with this group of people that I was trying to explain Brahman to them, and also the way that this consciousness works, because they were kind of like, it was a friendly debate we were having. So the way so she was not that so a girl I was talking to, she was not pretty well smart enough to understand, because it was getting complex, the concept. So I tried to explain it in a really beautiful example that I'll give to the listeners to understand the basic concept of Brahman. So I told her, humans can create humans, okay? Like we procreate, we make kids, but to create human itself, the most conscious being on the planet, there has to be someone higher than the human itself, right? This is the basic,
source of consciousness.
The basic science. So imagine, so humans create humans. So imagine humans are created by deities. I'm talking about the body, the human, everything, right, the physical, because the deities always are shown with more powers, maybe some have more hands, and some other, like in Hinduism, they have been shown with 4 hands or something like that. So the deities are equally more, like more powerful than the humans. So they can create the humans. They can even handle this existential universe, because yes, they can just handle it, but they cannot create it. They can create humans, but they cannot create the infinity, because only infinity can create infinity. If I keep, like, if you say to me that God can create everything, the science behind this, like even, there's a lot of quantum physicists, why they praise Upanishads, because see, if God is the creator of the world, he's creator of the 5 elements that the world is made of, he cannot be in control of it while making the elements. He has to be in some other form superior than those elements that he can create. If you only say that God is superior, he can do anything, that doesn't make sense, because he has to be some other form. So first point, it proves that God is formless. God cannot have a form, because he has to be formless to create the world. Because in the 5 elements, the hierarchy, the pyramid, the highest element is the space element, as we know. Everything consists inside the space, right? So what is higher than space? It has to be formless. Right? So it has to be formless. That clears out. Now, so we know God is formless. He's infinite, that means. That means he's infinite. So now infinity can create infinity. So now, yes, he can create the universe, he can create all the galaxies, the forms can maintain it, the deities can maintain it. But the question arises, what is higher than the universe itself too? What is created that infinity too? Because, so I explained to her, imagine a book. Okay, right? You have a book. So imagine a book. In the book, the papers are human. Inside, the papers are humans. You, me, everyone else. The cover of the book is the deity. The book cover is the deities. The book itself is the universe, right? The book itself is the universe. But who is higher than all of this? Paper cannot create paper. A book cannot create paper. A book can only contain it, right? The book can only contain the paper. Only the reader is aware of the book. I explained to her. Only the reader knows that the book is there. The readers who's inside, what is inside the content. And that reader is only can be the awareness, because awareness doesn't have a form, doesn't need a form. It is only that look at you, look at me. This universe is fake if we close our eyes. We open, it feels real. This is awareness. This is pure consciousness. This is what is God. God is this consciousness that we are seeing. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have a form. He can take forms. He's running the whole universe. Why cannot he? But in his ultimate grace, he's formless. He's in every single thing you see. You cannot put him in a limited thing and say, "Oh, he's God." God cannot be put in something limited, right? This just defeats the purpose of God. This defeats the purpose. So that's how I explain Brahman to someone who doesn't know about it. This is, I think, the basic I could explain. So back to the question, because I explained the Brahman to the audience. Now they can research if they want to, if they heard the term first time. What advice, after such a long, you've written the book, what advice would you give to someone who is struggling with their own spiritual journey at a stage of dilemma and now they are stuck? What advice would you give to them?
Well, first, I would congratulate them for the struggle. I mean, most people, I think, in fact, avoid the struggle and get involved in all kinds of, become workaholics or alcoholics or sexaholics or whatever it is in order to avoid the struggle. I would advise people, I would first congratulate people for being in the struggle. And second, I would advise them too to recognize that they're not alone. There's this business of being intimidated and not wanting to be different and not, wanting their friends to keep them and all that keeps people from pursuing these questions. You're not alone. People have, that's part of the book. The book is not telling you what to do, but the book is part of the message is that, look, I'm on the same journey as you are. And there are lots of other people like us. The more we can talk to each other and help each other along the way, great. I think the final thing, and again, this goes back to the answer of Job. Once we believe that there is an answer, like you just said in your explanation, once we believe that there's an eternal consciousness or Tao or whatever word you want to use, we don't have to understand it 100%. We just have to be reassured that it exists.
Yeah.
And it'll be okay. Julian of Norwich is this woman who lived in the Middle Ages. And she had, all kinds of mystical experiences, and it's worth reading. But at the end of the day, her answer is, all shall be well. All shall be well. It's very simple. But if you believe in a spiritual realm, you don't have to know all the answers. You just have to know that there are answers. And all shall be well. You can do that. That's great.
So finally, my last question would be,
Sure.
again, for long. So what message or takeaway do you hope that the readers, if they pick up the book now after listening to this podcast, would get from A Theology for the rest of us? What takeaways, what do you want from readers to take away from the book?
Yeah, like we just said, it is a spiritual struggle, but it's a worthwhile struggle, and you're not alone. And all shall be well. People get very depressed and anxious about a lot of these questions, but a lot of that comes from this feeling of just being alone and pretending. One of the best things about authenticity is that you tell the truth. It's not only a moral thing, it's also a very positive thing. When you pretend to be somebody you're not, the worst thing that can happen is that you do a good job of it, because what happens is you fool everybody, and those people who pretend to like you, they don't know who you are, so they're liking somebody who doesn't exist. And the people who might like the real you don't recognize you because you're doing a good job of pretending. So the basic takeaway is to be authentic, not because it's immoral to lie, but it's just pragmatic to be yourself. And that way you'll attract those people who are like-minded and on the same kind of path, so that everybody can help each other. That's it. The book is basically about permission. Ultimately, it's about permission. These are answers I've come up with, but you have permission to come up with your own answers. And let's share and see what we found out for each other.
This creates the like a base for them to like maybe do their own research and come up with their own.
Exactly.
This is your own set of opinions that you set them out for them so they can get ahead. Now they can do their own research. And in the whole podcast, I was thinking this one thing. Why did you write it? Was it like you said the lockdown, but was it something that necessary that you felt you need to do? I know you explained it, but in a way, was it really necessary to write it?
Well, why does an acorn grow into a tree? An acorn just does it. And Zen, there's this whole thing about following your nature, and I think you ask people who are creative, Vincent van Gogh and all these great artists, why do you do what you do? And basically they say, I can't not do it. It just comes up within me and needs expression. There's all kinds of explanations for, why did God create the universe? And if God is pure being, okay, why wasn't he just satisfied with that and just stop? So the notion of God creating is not just creating in the sense of, there wasn't stuff before and now there is stuff. God creates because creativity is part of being God. It's to want to create. Well, why do you do this podcast? Yeah, I know it's to help people and you're interested in these topics and all these kinds of things. But I think there's a part of you that wants to express itself through this media and that kind of thing.
Just creatively, yeah.
So, my attitude was, and again, I honestly, Krishna tells Arjuna, you're a warrior. You do what you need to do to be a warrior because that's your nature and you need to act accordingly. Well, I'm no fighter, but I can write, I can talk to people. That's part of my nature. The tragedy is when people sacrifice their nature to do something else that society tells them is more important.
To be somebody else that, just to be in the society. And
exactly, make more money.
Yes, and what happens at a certain point in lifetime when they get to a certain age, they realize that this was just such a waste. I could have been something else that I've always wanted, but I couldn't do it because I had to be something else. But now it's too late sometimes. So you can just be yourself and do what you want to do because there's no one to please other than yourself in this world, maybe in a way, but because you have to. So you have written this book.
John Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, said, hell is other people. The more we think in terms of other people and oppressing them or being afraid of them and all that kind of stuff, we don't do what we know deep inside we need to do.
So you have written this book.
Yes.
You're old also, if I would say, in a way. So what is your future plan and where can our listeners can learn more about you? What are you doing now and what are you going to do now? And that's such a long time to still you have a long life. It's not like I would say. So what are you going to do now?
Well, in terms of resources, I have a website, very creative, ArthurYalevberg.com.
I think I would have dropped the link.
So, I manage, and there's also a Facebook page with the book, Theology for the Rest of Us. I spend a lot of time doing this, talking to people, answering questions, asking questions, learning about people. There are people literally all over the world that I never anticipated could possibly have met. Yeah, that's basically what I do. But there is, I have to say, I don't know how it comes across, there is a sense of peace that I wrote the book because I wanted to write the book, and now it's not up to me. The Holy Spirit or Brahman or the Tao or whatever, they'll do with it what they will. And people who would benefit from it will come across it. And if they don't, they don't.
I think the people that are still listening to us till the end, because people have a low attention span these days,
Sure.
to listen till the end. But if you are listening, so I'm going to give you a great bonus. I think that you should take away from this episode as well, that we are here to play the divine part, to be the divine, because we are the divine itself. It's no other, it's us. And the heaven is not somewhere else. It's right here in the present moment. This is heaven. Because
The kingdom
anywhere,
of heaven is within you.
yes, imagining heaven somewhere else, it's the strategy of a mind. It's
Right.
just taking you away from life. It's not letting, because you think life is a struggle, life is deadly. Life can live like heaven, but you think no, life can only be lived like heaven when I have this certain wealth, or no, I have certain somebody. No, you can live it like, right, like, well, we are talking, we are in heaven, we are enjoying ourselves. This is heaven too. This is no other thing. What are you going to do in heaven? So if it exists, it doesn't exist. It doesn't matter right now. What matters is this moment. But people
Right.
are so into the future, always imagining. So know this, everyone, that I would tell you, and if you can take this in, we are experiencing everything. We are not doing anything. This is something that you should see. You should observe it. You would realize this soon, that we are just we are not in control, even though we are in control. This is what Krishna says in the Gita too,
Right.
that I am doing everything, but I am doing nothing. I'm acting, I'm doing everything, I'm in the action, but if you look at the whole world, it's just like that. So that's how you should take and live it, like an experience, and then you can enjoy yourself more than anything else, and be yourself. This is something that you should really take away from the book that you also written. It's extremely important to not to pretend. Pretendance has to be dropped. Be real. That's the world needs. You're so scared, so drop that scarcity and be yourself. And I think, lastly, a lot of youngsters, your teacher, I don't think anyone would be better than you to say about it. What lessons would you give to the youngsters that are listening to the podcast? Some tips.
Okay. Don't be afraid. This business of fear is a big deal. Don't be afraid. And there are people around you who will help you. And the more you're not afraid, the more you'll find who they are. I think this business of fear and intimidation is a big thing with kids. There's a reason why little kids are so fascinated with dinosaurs, because dinosaurs are big and powerful and strong, and kids are not. Kids are little and that kind of thing. Kids need to know, though, that the universe will help them and people will help them, but they have to be open to accept the help. It all shall be well. And the Buddha's lesson of impermanence, whatever you're feeling this minute, as good as it is or as bad as it is, it's not going to last. It'll be different tomorrow. So don't be afraid.
So, thank you so much for joining today on the show, Arthur.
No,
I
it's
think
my pleasure. Thank you for
your
the
insights
opportunity.
were incredibly valuable. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us and tell us about your book, because it's truly, I think, one great thing that you did. I think I say it honestly, because we're in the podcast, that you wrote it short, because I think
Yes.
people have. I think if I have to go, I think I'm going to read this book 100 pages. Oh man, I can finish this in a day, just in one sitting. But now these are 300 pages, 400, so much text. People, it's that's why I think that I think you wrote it really beautifully. The short structure, people can pick it up and just short read. So again, thank you so much for your expertise and everything that you're doing. And I think our listeners are going to be pretty happy that you come on and shared your knowledge to us. So thank you
Well,
so
thank
much,
you for the
Arthur.
opportunity.
Thank you so
And
much.
you've done a wonderful job making this stuff available to all of your listeners. I think it's great for them too. Krishna, the divine, and the Holy Spirit works in mysterious ways through all of us.
Thank you for tuning into Spirituality with a Twist today. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and gained some valuable insights from it. As we wrap up, remember that spirituality and philosophy and science are not separate entities, but rather interconnected aspects of our search for deeper understanding. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and always trust your inner wisdom. And if you want to support the show and buy me a coffee, you can find the link in the description down below. Also, don't forget to connect with me on my social media. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter, where I share reels and behind the scenes content from the podcast. I love to hear your thoughts and feedback on today's episode. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. And you can also watch the audio version of the show on your favorite podcast platform. So once again, thank you for joining us today. And remember to keep seeking the truth, wherever it may lead you. See you next time.